Hello and a very warm welcome to the Green Bean. My name's Katie, and together with my best friend Jack, I love to make and share these videos which cover all kinds of aspects of my creative process, as well as my love for nature and the outdoors, usually in the shape of a walk on my beloved Dartmoor, which is the national park close to where we live. In this episode, I'm taking a deep dive into painting, and I'm going to show you the process from start to finish of my work on this mushroom composition. First of all, my materials. So I'm using this black paper sketchbook. It's from Rowney, and it's a simple black cartridge paper. You can see I've begun sketching the design outline on here in pencil. I'm using something soft like a 2B, just so it will be easy to erase those lines when I'm finished. The paints I'm going to use are my favourite gouache paints. They're Horadam by Schmincke, and I have a fairly limited selection of colours because they're not cheap paints to buy. I tend to just add one or two to my palette when I need to top up a colour. I might buy one or two extras to expand things, but really I can do quite a lot with a very basic colour palette. And I'm also using Rowney Cryla brushes, which are intended for acrylic paints, but I find they work pretty well with gouache too. And my sweet paint palette, my ceramic paint palette, was made for me, commissioned by me, from lovely Rachel in the Dales Pottery. I reached out to her and asked if she could make this idea for a weird paint palette that I had in my mind, and she did such a great job. I have a mini one and a gigantic one, and they're so incredibly useful. Before I had these, I used to just use a random piece of cardboard or plastic from the kitchen. So I feel like a real artist now that I've got a proper sophisticated paint palette, and I love the fact that I can wash it off and reuse it an infinite number of times. To begin the design, I'm adding just a base layer of colour to a few of the components of this illustration. Technically this illustration is like lots of little mini illustrations in one, so I'm considering each item in this composition as a separate illustration of its own. I like to mix my gouache with just a little bit of water to help it flow. I find when it comes straight out the tube, it's very viscous, and when you paint with it, it can be a little bit chalky and dry. So I like to loosen it up with a little bit of water, but not too much, because I still want that colour to be really opaque when I work it onto the black paper. now the base layers of colour are down, I'm going to add some shading, and I'm doing this with a much more diluted paint. This is where gouache being a water-based paint really helps, because as you work, it wets the layer underneath and you can blend those two colours really well. If you're using acrylic paints, for example, which become permanent once the colours are dry, it would be quite a different technique, I think, to add shading to things after you've painted them. With gouache, it means that I can work and build up the layers, but nothing is permanent. I can always work a little bit into the layer beneath. Now comes my favourite part of the process, which is time to add the fine details. I really love this bit because it's when the illustration feels like it really starts to come together and come to life. At almost every moment up until that point, I can think that a piece of work is rubbish, or I'm not doing a very good job, or I'm not pleased with how it looks. But once I start adding those final details, I begin to think, oh, actually, maybe I do know what I'm doing, or start to feel really pleased with how it's coming together. Rather than work on this illustration solidly, I worked over it in small segments over several days, and that's quite often what I'll do with any given drawing or painting. Partly because my attention span is quite short, but also I think walking away from a piece really helps me mull things over, reconsider things, come back with a fresh perspective. And I also like to break things down for variety. So you can see I've now almost finished the top half of this painting before I've even added any base layers to the bottom half. I feel like a more systematic approach would have been to add all of the base layers first and then start working into the other layers. But truth be told, I hadn't fully decided what I was going to be painting on the bottom half of the illustration, so I worked on the details of the top half while I was still mulling over what I was going to do at the bottom. One of the things I'm doing for this piece is really consciously using a limited colour palette. All of the colours are mixed from just 4 colours of paint: burnt umber, raw sienna, olive green, and a tiny bit of cadmium yellow. Obviously I'm also using black and white, black for the shadows, and lots of white. That's actually the paint I use the most, which is why I've got this gigantic tube of it, in comparison to just the small tubes of all my other colours. One thing I don't think I've talked about in relation to my painting before is how I work from a combination of my sketchbook and photo references. So I've been practicing painting mushrooms for several months before I started work on this piece. They've been appearing in my sketchbook very frequently, and if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know I spend a lot of time photographing and looking at mushrooms as well. But I also refer to other people's photos. I use Google image search as an incredible resource when I'm looking up specific details of what a certain species looks like. And I'm never using that to refer to copy a composition of a photo, but it is really helpful for referencing details. So it means that the mushrooms in my final illustration are kind of an amalgamation of observations from my own sketchbook and observations out in the wild, as well as using reference photos as well. My original idea for this piece was to turn it into a sheet of stickers, but the more I work on it, the more happy I am with how it's turning out, and I'm wondering whether I might turn it into one or two other products for my shop as well. It's always a tricky balancing act because obviously it costs money to turn illustrations into products, and I can't just produce all the things that I would like to produce because I have a finite amount of money and a finite amount of space in my shop. So I'll need to give some careful consideration to what this piece finally becomes, but it's certainly going to be stickers, and I'm really excited about the idea of that, but I'm not sure what else. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Green Bean and watching me bring this illustration to life from a blank sheet of paper. I hope you've enjoyed the process. I'm really enjoying working on different formats of videos, and the variety is really helping me keep making them as well. If you like what I'm doing and would be willing and able to support it, I'd really appreciate you heading on over to Patreon. I offer various benefits, from early access to my videos to watching them without adverts, extra episodes and discounts in my shop in return for financial support, which is what makes these videos possible. I couldn't do any of it without financial input, and if you're one of the folks who contributes, thank you so much. I really love my work. I love getting to do this every day, and being able to share it with you is like the icing on the cake, so thank you for making that possible. I hope you've enjoyed being here, hanging out with me and Jack, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.